In today's video, we're going to be taking a look here at our upcoming pattern. We do have a couple of severe weather events, one that is ongoing and one that we do anticipate happening within the next 10 days. Also, a pretty big snowstorm up there in the northeastern states that we need to discuss. Let's just dive into things and take a look here at the afternoon tomorrow. And we do have a enhanced risk of severe weather that might even be up to a moderate for portions of Ohio. This is also a threat that was ongoing today on the day for Monday, April 1st, for states like Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Illinois, Iowa. And it's spread eastward, as you can see, where a lot of these thunderstorms are to the east of our low that is over Illinois. So for the afternoon tomorrow, this will be mostly for, and this is thunderstorms, not the worst of the severe weather, but just kind of the overall thunderstorm. We see that there's Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and even up and through Michigan. Also, Pennsylvania is going to be impacted, New York, West Virginia, Maryland, and even areas further south later on. So let's move towards the evening. I want to just dive towards what these thunderstorms could look like overnight, because this does appear to be like a threat that's going to continue. We do see that Alabama, Georgia, the Panhandle of Florida now, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York. So we have a lot of states involved here. And really the reason for that is we have a 982 here over Michigan and a stretching cold front. I talk about these long and far stretching cold fronts oftentimes, because when you have this far stretching cold front, you just have more real estate really just being impacted by this. When you get these shorter cold fronts, you're really not seeing much activity to the south of it. But when they stretch like this across all of these different states, we're seeing more overall areas impacted, and that leads to more impacts overall. The more space that these events take up, the more probability that we just see bad things happen, of course. Keep in mind, this is a very strong low, 982 again over Michigan. We see snowfall for the UP of Michigan there into Wisconsin, Iowa, and portions of northern Illinois. So some springtime snowfall action happening. By the time we reach Wednesday afternoon here on April 3rd, we see it's still a 985, still hovering around Michigan. We see this cold front is still very far stretching. So we see states like Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, D.C., Delaware, up through New Jersey, Pennsylvania being impacted by this thunderstorm activity. And then we have showers and wintry weather for the Northeast, states like New York and then New England being impacted by that. Let's keep going into the evening, because what we see is our old primary low has now weakened down to a 997. Most of this energy is transferred to an offshore low, a 987, so a much stronger low now offshore of kind of New Jersey or Long Island area there. We do see heavier snowfall taking place a little bit further north than originally anticipated, which honestly is just probably what we all should have suspected. This seems a lot more realistic to me, given the time of year. So for northern New York, especially the Adirondacks, into states like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, mostly seeing the snowfall, very, very realistic in my opinion. I feel a lot more confident about this solution than what we've previously seen these models outputting. And by the afternoon, we see a 986 over Cape Cod, and we see Maine, again, Adirondacks straight through Vermont, New Hampshire, and then there in Maine for the entire state of Maine seeing snowfall. This is something that we do see happen in April. Early April is not really a time where we expect the snow to be completely done for these regions. This is a rather strong system, I would say, and a rather impactful snow event for this time of year, but still areas where it is rather common to see some springtime snowfall. This is just a hefty one, like I said. By Friday afternoon, we see that low is still there, but the air is becoming a little bit less cold. This is the afternoon hour. We still have some higher elevation snowfall for a lot of West Virginia, even some of Ohio there in the hilly kind of eastern regions of Ohio. We see Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania, and then areas like New York and through New England. Those higher elevations seeing some daytime snowfall, lower elevation areas seeing rainfall. And that all kind of eventually moves out all the way by Sunday afternoon. Speaking of Sunday afternoon, we have a low over South Dakota, 996 now. We see this kind of classic cold front look where we have thunderstorm activity prevailing for a lot of the plains. So we're going to be on high alert once again for states like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, probably Illinois as well, and that'll probably extend further east over time. We do see some snowfall happening across the Rockies due to this low, so for states like Montana, Idaho, Montana there, Wyoming, Utah, and down through Colorado as well, we're seeing heavy snowfall in these areas because that is a relatively strong low as well. That one eventually breaks up. We can see that cold front kind of outpaces everything. We see this sort of frontal boundary look here for a lot of these areas. Again, another thunderstorm threat. Not a lot of cold air behind it. It does have good humidity and warmth to work with the areas that it's moving into. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a little bit less of a major event, just because we don't have that severe cold and dry air moving into very humid and warm air. It's more like slightly colder and slightly drier air moving into slightly warmer and slightly more moist air, as opposed to that very strong contrast. Now, as we move towards Tuesday, this is when we really get a kind of major event, in my opinion. It appears like it could be, at least. We have a cold front trying to develop, so thunderstorms throughout Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Missouri there. Even some showery activity for Kansas and Nebraska there as a result of this one. As we move just a couple of hours, we see this one really gets its act together. We see it spreading northward here, 1,003, so a weaker low this time around for Nebraska, but you can clearly tell there's a bit of a cold front, warm front dynamic trying to take place, with warm, humid air surging throughout the Midwest and the eastern states here, and then relatively cold air trying to swing underneath. Again, not as severe as our current event by any means as far as that contrast between the air masses. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it won't be a major severe weather event, as this is 222 hours out. There is still a lot of time for things to pick up, things to change, and we're going to be watching it closely. Really, anytime you have this severe uplift here in the jet stream, almost straight vertical, this is really a telltale sign of a lot of warmth and humidity out ahead of this system. So that's kind of ingredient number one. And regardless, it's not Arctic air behind it, but there is much cooler and drier air behind it. So this should be enough of a contrast to really spark up some activity, especially across the southern plains like Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Missouri especially. Again, time will tell, and this could kind of shift gears a little bit. But by the time we're taking a look at Thursday morning on the 11th, look at this, 1,001 over Missouri, and look at all that moisture there over kind of the Gulf states like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee. I'm going to be really watching this one because this seems pretty intense. We have lots of thunderstorms firing up, and I'm very curious to see what this is going to look like as we reach the more kind of medium to short range over time. So we're going to be tracking that one very closely. Let's see if the GFS model has it. Here's our kind of current storm. We see that energy transfer offshore for the day on Wednesday. We see that snowstorm take place a little bit further south than the European model, but not by much. It's still looking like much more of a northern northeast system as opposed to just a widespread event. We'll take a look at the total snowfall in a minute, but a little bit of a shifted gear there for sure. Colder air prevails over the east for a while, and eventually we see that same kind of storm take place. Notice that it, instead of kind of just moving to the north here from the four corner states, here it is. The European model took it up here. We're going to see the GFS model want to kind of swing it underneath, which is going to be a much different approach. So let's watch it play out and kind of note the differences here. So we see it swing underneath. That low is located between Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi there. And I anticipate that this would result in less severe weather than the European model would. We don't have much of a cold front dynamic underneath. This would likely be some severe weather for the Texas coast, southern Louisiana, and then southern Mississippi and southern Alabama, as opposed to that more widespread event if our low is to the north, where we would have a bigger corridor to work with for severe weather. So fingers crossed for this GFS solution to come true. As we reach towards the afternoon of Wednesday, though, this low does actually do a nice job of reaching much further northward. Here, more towards in between Missouri and Illinois, and we do get a pretty big quadrant of some potential severe weather in the deeper south and southeast areas. Again, that's Wednesday afternoon. Here's Thursday the 11th, and look at that, 991 over Michigan. Looks very similar to our previous storm. Lots of warmth and moisture moving up the east coast. The peak of this, by the way, I've never really mentioned this in my videos, but the peak of that warmth and that humidity is going to be at the peak of these kind of humps here that you can see in these different lines that you see across your screen. These are our geopotential height, and really the peak of that ridge is going to be where we see the peak of these humps, like I was mentioning, or the peak of these ridges that we're seeing in these lines. So really, when I'm looking at that warmth and humidity surging, I'm trying to kind of draw an imaginary line towards the peak of those different lines, and that kind of gives you an idea of where that warmth is really surging in from. And again, same story back here. The peak of that trough is going to be at the bottom of these opposite humps. So something like this is going to be the axis of that. Let me just kind of redraw this. So the axis of your ridge is there, axis of your trough is here. Very close together, and that should create a lot of instability here. I expect potentially an East Coast event, as we have our primary low again up in Michigan, cold front kind of stretching down, warm front somewhere up above, something like that is the look. Cold front is probably a little bit behind where I just drew, so something like this, and then this is more of the look. And again, this kind of cold front quadrant would be the thunderstorm area to watch. After this is said and done, we do get into a much colder pattern. Keep in mind the GFS has been wanting to do this all winter and springtime long, but they've oftentimes been a little less severe than what this model is indicating, but could be. So keep that in mind for you farmers and gardeners. Let's take a look at that total snowfall, as I was mentioning, for the Northeast. Again, 2 days ago in our video, we were looking at northern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, into Massachusetts. I think Connecticut and Rhode Island was a little far south, but we saw this maybe 100 miles further south than what we're seeing now, maybe 2. But now the peak of it seems to be somewhere between Canada and northern New England. Here is really where the bullseye is. We see the Adirondacks in that 1 to 2 foot amount. Same story with the White Mountains here, and then those hilly and mountainous regions of northern Maine. We would be watching this entire corridor here really closely for heavy snowfall totals, even stretching down some of the Green Mountains and Berkshires there. And same thing for the Catskills. We do have some indication that there could be 6 to 10 inches perhaps. But this is just your total snow. This doesn't account for any milting or struggle to accumulate. And I suspect with the time of year, the sun angle, all of that stuff, that totals would be a bit lower, especially in the southern quadrant here. Maybe even to the point where you could cut the totals in half, perhaps, with the time of year in mind. So definitely, we're going to be paying attention to all of this. These mountainous regions to the north, they probably still have a pretty good snowpack. Things have been a bit colder, especially in the higher elevations, and I don't suspect that milting would have as much of a play at this as it will in those lower elevation and more southern areas like southern New England, southern New York here in the Catskills, places of that nature. GFS model sort of agrees. We see a little bit further south with it. The bullseye maybe over the White Mountains here, areas a little bit further south in New Hampshire, and then around that kind of Maine, New Hampshire border. Same story with the Adirondacks. I guess the biggest takeaway to draw kind of a relation between these two models is it's going to be those mountainous areas of the northern half of New England where that bullseye is going to be on both models. There is still time for shifts. It could shift south. It could shift further north. It could shift warmer, colder, snowier, less snowy. Definitely a lot to still track, but we have seen a northern tick, which again takes it into a more realistic territory in my opinion. Definitely going to be something to watch. Could be a hefty one and probably one of the bigger springtime snowstorms we've seen in a while. I'm excited to track this one with you guys, so tune in with us daily. We do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.